Hi, this is your Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at VMware Explore. And today we have with us Kit Colbert, CTO of VMware. Kit, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you have been with VMware for a very long time, but this is your first VMware Explore. Sometimes I end up saying VMware, right?
I know.
As a CTO,
Yep.
so you have been on the stage. Tell us a bit about the energy you're seeing after this long break because of COVID.
Yeah, it's been great. So you're right. Been to many VM worlds in different roles. In fact, CTO for different BUs, but this is my first one as CTO for the company. I think there's definitely some really interesting differences. For some reason now, a lot of people want to take selfies with me. I don't really understand why. Like, I'm the same person I was, like last year, or a few years ago. But coming back after a few years away, there's just a palpable sense of excitement. It's really, really amazing. I'm seeing it in terms of the turnout. We're getting great engagement from executives of many of our customers. Our executive summit is actually at capacity. We couldn't take any more folks, and got way more folks than we expected. I also talked with some of our partner technical leaders. That one was also huge and just filled to the capacity. And so it's just great to see all these folks showing up, ready to engage, and also very much ready to give us feedback. And I think excited for where we're going, right? This whole cross-cloud vision that we put out there is really resonating with a lot of folks. And so, as I mentioned during the general session, we've got to figure this out as a community, right? And so we can't do it VMware alone, we got to do it all together. And so I think that's exactly what we're doing here at Explore.
You made some points, and that that also kind of covers the question that I'm going to ask. Number one is the name Explore itself, from Word to Explore. I do remember, I think it was before COVID, when then CEO Pat talked about the VMware is like a dial tone to the Kubernetes world.
Yep.
And this year, you folks are talking a lot about multi-cloud.
Yep.
So I do want to understand, because during this time in VMware, you folks do a lot of things. You're not just in one space.
Yeah.
Through Pivotal, you folks did the Cloud Foundry whole, and then you have a lot of big market in just virtual computing world, and you have VMware Workplaces. I mean, so much you folks do. And during this COVID, the way businesses run has changed. Mm-hmm. So talk about what VMware is and how you folks are kind of helping. So I want to understand the whole messaging behind Explore and multi-cloud.
Yeah. Well, I think to all the points you raised, we do a lot more than just virtualization, right? And yet, I think when people looked at VMworld, and in fact, even when people think about VMware, oftentimes it is just with a virtualization lens. And so the point of the rebrand is try and open the aperture a bit, to try and say, hey, we're not just focused on virtualization. Clearly, vSphere is still a core part of what we do, and it will always be, I think, and hundreds of thousands of customers rely on it, so we're not taking our eye off the ball. At the same time, to your point, we do so much more. And that's really about what Explore is focusing on, that we're trying to move away from just this sort of specific focus on virtualization to a much broader focus on multi-cloud. And when we talk about multi-cloud, that is a very expansive term. What we're talking about essentially is an evolution of industry architecture, that today you've got kind of your different public clouds, single clouds. And what multi-cloud, what we're kind of trying to figure out is, how do you create a new type of cloud, something that complements the existing clouds and your existing on-prem locations and edge and so forth, but is horizontal in nature. And we call ours, cross-cloud services. We've seen other folks like theCUBE just had an event a few weeks ago. They call it Super Cloud. And I think that's the name they have for that horizontal thing. But the point is that this cross-cloud or super cloud or multi-cloud or whatever you want to call it, it's going to be comprised of a bunch of different pieces of functionality. You're going to have an app platform piece. You're going to have an infrastructure piece. You're going to have a networking and security piece. You're going to have a management piece. You're going to have an end user piece. So it really is pulling together all the different things we've been working on for the past 15, 20 odd years into this bigger frame. And so that's kind of how it all comes together, right? Is that these are not, they may have started at VMware, sort of individualistic technologies, but that's not what they are at all now, and that they're much more highly integrated, and that it takes that integration to provide that solution that customers are looking for.
when we look at edge, we are not just talking about small IT devices. We are talking about edge data centers.
Yeah.
With the evolution of 5G private networks, things are becoming. We talk about DPUs also there. So once again, VMware, you folks do so many things.
Yep.
Is there any specific, area that you're looking? Hey, this is where we're going to focus on multi-cloud space, because once again, the ecosystem is large. There are a lot of companies there. Everybody is doing different things.
Yeah.
And as you once again mentioned, you work with partners, not just VMware. So
Yeah,
talk about the specific areas that you are looking at multi-cloud.
Well, sure. Let me touch on edge just real quick because it is a bit of a buzzword, and partly it does mean different things to different people. Like telcos have a very specific definition of edge, whereas I think, even many folks within VMware might say edge is really anywhere that's not a data center or a cloud. So it could be a retail store, or a factory, or a distribution center, or these sorts of things. So just really quick to close off on edge, our view is that while it's going to be a smaller form factor, it won't be like a Raspberry Pi or an IoT device. It'll be usually a data center class server, but there might be different form factors, different packaging for it. But there will be some limitations, right? There's usually limitations in the total amount of compute that you've got. There's usually limitations in the networking bandwidth. So there's all sorts of things, and you do need to be thoughtful around how do you do the right sets of data processing, compute, et cetera, locally, because it's just too costly to send it up to the cloud. So we've got to be mindful of those very practical considerations with edge. But the point is that, when we think of edge as just yet another part of multi-cloud. It's just another location with which you can do compute, with which you can store data and run applications. Now let's see. I got to get back to your original question, or the bigger question. So I think your question was about partners and how do they
partners, and
fit
when
in.
we look at the multi-cloud, what are the specific areas that you really want to look at and solve? Yeah.
So it's actually, there's many, many specific areas that we want to solve, but let me take a step back. I think what's most important, actually, when we think about partners and the overall ecosystem is having a clear and open standard for multi-cloud services and a taxonomy, and essentially, how all these different services from different vendors can interact. So we are very clear and cognizant at VMware that we're not going to be doing everything in the cross-cloud space, right? Or like everything in, let's say, even the cloud space. The whole point of cross-cloud services is not to sort of completely abstract the underlying cloud. We want there to be native cloud services that customers can take advantage of. Like if you love DynamoDB, for instance, from AWS, you should be able to use it. But maybe you say, hey, I want to standardize on my secure software supply chain. And even within a secure software supply chain, Talos Application Platform can do a lot there in terms of that end-to-end across clouds, but we're not going to be able to do everything. And so we got to partner with other folks. And so the question is, do we have a clear sort of functional decomposition of responsibilities? And is there clear delineation on what the dividing lines between each of those responsibilities are? And I don't think we have that yet as an industry, right? So one thing that we've done as VMware is release a white paper, fairly short, just a few pages, on trying to define what a multi-cloud service is and a taxonomy for those services. And the point of this is really just to start the conversation around what those interfaces should look like between these different parts, and to have that conversation with the industry and with our partners. And that's exactly the goal, right? And so the hope that comes out of that is this kind of overall architecture, this overall framework that different folks can fit in. And that way, you as a customer can sort of pick and choose the right things and have some level of interoperability between them. So I think that's the most important piece.
You brought a very interesting point, interoperability. And when we talk about multi-cloud, when we talk about, you can AWS, Azure, GCP, whatever you pick, it's not like people, when they talk about multi-cloud, they're not running the same thing on different clouds,
Yeah.
There are different advantages.
Yeah.
But the problem is that, first of all, cloud, they had data gravity.
Yep.
And migration can be a big challenge, especially, I was talking to a friend at DoD, and one of their biggest challenges, they want to be able to move. So once again, interoperability is really critical.
Yep.
So how do you look at this problem?
No, I know where you're going. So let's take a step back. So you're right. Each cloud will have different best-of-breed capabilities. And in fact, we see that is oftentimes one of, if not the largest determinant of which cloud a particular developer or development team will use for their application. Because they might say, hey, I need the best ML services. And so they go to the cloud with the best ML services for their application or use case. And that's great, right? And we want that sort of innovation. And that's exactly why we say, well, we want you to have that sort of choice. Maybe the company says, well, I want to have a standardized software supply chain security implementation. I want to have standardized cost management. I want to have standardized these other things, but then let developers choose whatever service they use. Now, to your point, you may say, well, okay, that's great. And they get that great best-of-breed capability, but now it kind of locks them into that cloud. They can't just up and move that app, at least not easily, to another cloud unless they do a lot of rework to that app, right? Re-architect using a new service from the new cloud, et cetera. Now, I think for a lot of customers, that's a trade-off they're willing to make. And as long as they go into it eyes wide open, I say, good on them. That's totally fine. That aligns with their business case, all good. Now, you're right, though, there will be other customers, and defense is definitely one that I hear this from, that say, well, for us, it doesn't work because, if a foreign adversary is attacking that cloud, I need to be able to move my apps out of there usually within hours, and you can't refactor an application within hours. So they're going to have more limits, right? But so what they might do instead of using a single cloud or native cloud service like Redshift, they might use a Snowflake, because Snowflake you can get on AWS or Google or Azure. So again, I think what we're trying to provide in terms of this cross-cloud architecture is not a one-size-fits-all or you must do this or that. It's really a set of options based on a company's unique situation and requirements.
Excellent. Once again, thanks for addressing the question. Now let's talk about because we talked about buzzwords, right? So Web3 is a new buzzword depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
But you also participate in the session, and I also cover it a lot. Okay. First of all, I want to hear from you, how would you define Web3?
We debate this a lot, like what is Web3? So I think it's a couple of things. I think there's a few different lenses through which to look at Web3. So the first one is sort of, Web 1 was a lot of reading. Web 2 was a lot of reading and writing. It's a lot of it like social. You're posting stuff you're creating. It's kind of the creator economy with Web 2. Web 3 still got read and write, but now you have own as well. And own is kind of a core property of the Web 3 architecture. And the way you own things is via blockchain. And that could be owning a virtual thing or whatever, like an NFT, or it could be owning in the sense of owning your own data. So like my social graph on a social network, for instance, I could actually have control of that. That social network could leverage it, and they could add new connections there via my use of it, but I would actually own that and be able to export it to some other, let's say, social site. So that's one lens, is kind of the read, write, own. The other one is sort of the decentralization, centralization discussion. And so that one, Web 1, you could argue is very decentralized. There were no real internet giants initially. There were just a bunch of websites everywhere. They're all pretty small and kind of did their own thing. And you kind of had to know exactly where to go. Search engines, weren't great at the time. It was like kind of the Wild West. You just had to know exactly where you're going. With Web 2, what we saw was that certain folks won out disproportionately. They became aggregators. You look at Google or Facebook or these different folks, and that they had this sort of center of gravity that pulled everything together. So you had these centralized platforms. So Web 3 is saying, well, hold on, can we get some of the benefits of Web 2, some of those benefits of centralization, be able to find information, be able to manage a lot of things, et cetera, but do it in a more decentralized way so you don't have those gatekeepers. Like for instance, we talk about creators a bunch, right? And creators might be on YouTube making a bunch of videos, and that's great. They got 1 million followers. But then if YouTube changes their rules, changes their policies around how much their take rate is for any income that's generated, what are those creators going to do? Like today they can't up and leave, because if they go to TikTok, they have to rebuild those 1 million followers, and that's really tough. But what if they could move it? And that's kind of what Web3 is, like that kind of decentralized piece, is that it gives them a bit more control. That's the vision in theory anyway. So those are the two lenses that I typically look at when thinking about Web3.
Yeah, I think the Web3 kind of brings the beauty of Internet 1.0, where literally, we used to Alta Vista, whatever solutions were there, and we used to have our own, smaller website running. Yep. And the most interesting point is gatekeepers. Yeah. You're creating content, but someone else actually. So I think Web 1 was more or less like you own a house. Web 2 is more about your rent. Yeah. so you have no HOAs there. You have no ownership. Yeah. So Web 3 is kind of bringing it. But there will be a lot of challenges in terms of how it's built, architecture, and there are a lot of political discussions going on within the communities making fun of Web 3. So we'll see how things shape up.
Well, I think it's definitely in the early phase of the hype cycle, or maybe at the peak of the actual hype piece. but early in the overall cycle. And so I think there's a lot of those sort of takes out there for sure.
Yeah. So when you were at the session, what was interesting discussion that you kind of participated in? What was the?
We had a session on sort of Web3 and the enterprise, and why have enterprises not really done much with Web3 or really scratched the surface of its potential. And this is interesting. And it was between myself. I'm a work at VMware, but it wasn't about anything necessarily about VMware. This was about just general sort of enterprises Web3. And we had someone from Chainalysis, and then also David Pogue as a moderator. So it was a really great discussion. I actually learned a lot. It was one of those conversations just totally open. It flowed well. I think we hit a lot of really interesting points, and I think also hit on a lot of the subtleties that are there in this conversation. Because it's easy to talk about blockchain and Web3 kind of at a high level, but when you start digging into it, there are a lot of subtleties, there are a lot of challenges. Like for instance, people love to be able to say, hey, I want to take my social graph with me. I don't want to have all these gatekeepers in the way. But at the same time, gatekeepers actually provide a lot of support. Like for instance, with blockchain, if you lose your private keys, your coins, or if you're doing Bitcoin, your coins are gone. Like they're out there, you can never get them back, and they may be worth now millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, like we've seen in some of these cases. And you're like, wow, wouldn't it be nice if someone could reset my password for me so I could go get them? And that's what a gatekeeper does. And so you look at it and you're like, well, actually gatekeepers do provide a lot of value. The problem is right now, you don't really have much choice. It's kind of a take it or leave it proposition. And I think where the discussion sort of evolved, what we recognized was that, hey, in a blockchain world, all the data will be out there on the blockchain. And that gatekeeper can provide some level of additional functionality on top of that and add some value. But I think it's also an open marketplace where that gatekeepers view the blockchain or what they expose from the blockchain may be different than what someone else exposes. So you have a bit more competition there based on the same set of data. And I think that will actually be good for consumers and for the public overall. And the point was, while oftentimes we didn't touch on enterprises directly, the observation that consumer behavior will affect enterprises, as we saw with the iPhone, the consumerization of IT, that's going to continue to happen. And so enterprises have to be very cognizant of what's happening in the Web3 space and the potential changes and actually impacts to their business model. So anyway, great discussion, very, very thought-provoking.
No, it was, and also good to hear your insights as well. Now I want to talk about something which might be a little bit uncomfortable, so we'll see how that goes, is the Broadcom acquisition that's coming up.
Sure.
I talked to a lot of VMware, ecosystem partners.
Yep.
So there are some not necessarily panic, but some concerns, some uncertainty, which is always there. When IBM was going to acquire Red Hat, there was a lot of uncertainty. But if you look at the VMware's history, you folks have EMC and Dell, but the thing is that you folks never kind of lost track of your vision.
Yeah.
So I cover open source, so your open source story continued to get better and better.
Yeah.
So if I look at the track record, I have no such concerns. Of course, new owners will bring new different, but you have your own characteristic. So is there anything you would like to say to address some of those concerns that partners or customers might have?
Yeah, look, I think it's natural for folks to have concerns. People have seen some of the changes that Broadcom made with CA or Symantec, and they naturally extrapolate that some of those things might happen here at VMware. The reality is that we don't know. The reality is that VMware is a very different company in a very different position from those other companies. And we're in a very competitive, innovative market and all these sorts of things. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I think my main advice for people is that honestly, there is quite frankly right now a dearth of information. We just don't know that much. And quite frankly, I'm not sure if Broadcom knows that much either. We're in the middle of some deep dive sessions where they're learning a lot about our company. And I'm not sure what decision they made or if they know what they're going to do yet, right? Will there be some changes? Probably. There's always change, right? The question is, will those changes be good or will they be bad? And I think people are making assumptions one way. I think my thing is, let's just wait and see, right? Let's wait and see what the data says. Until the acquisition, until and if the acquisition completes, because there's always a chance it may not. We are an independent company. We are continuing to execute on everything we're doing. And quite frankly, we think that this, everything we're doing is core to our future. We talk about cross-cloud. We talk about what's happening with multi-cloud. This is undeniably happening within the industry. And, in order for us to stay relevant there, we've got to do, a lot of these things that we're doing. So in any case, I think it's easy to get caught up in the speculation and everything. For us, we're just keeping our heads down. We're focused on execution. We're, of course, talking with partners and customers and trying to help them understand this as well. But my main advice is let's just wait and see rather than speculate, because that's not a productive use of time.
Right, and that's why I also, as I said, I looked at the history, how things shape up, for VMware in previous. So,
yep.
You can also look at that, and of course, there's a lot of uncertainty. So you're right, there's no speculation. But thanks for once again taking that question. There's no need to panic or worry. It just changes. That's simple.
Yeah, I do think what I've seen is that people's thoughts run away with them, right? And so I think my feedback is like, hey, it's good to be thinking about it, but there's a lot of stuff going on today that we got to focus on, and that that's what we really need to make sure that we get right, because that is what's going to lead us into the future.
Kit, once again, thank you so much for taking time out and talk to me, and I look forward to our next discussion, maybe either virtual or we live in a hybrid world, right?
Yeah.
So virtual and in person, but I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.